Okay, so I think we make a start. We've got a good turnout, just over 70 people in the room, which is great. So very warm welcome to everyone. My name is Stefan Bohm. I'm professor in organization and sustainability at the University of Exeter Business School based in Cornwall. I'm very, very grateful that Irene Henriques has agreed to give this talk. She's a professor of sustainability and economics at the Schulich School of Business at York University in Canada. And Irene is a very interdisciplinary scholar. She's a trained economist, but has then migrated into management and is one of these rare breeds of scholars who can talk to both economists and management scholars. Not everybody can do that. But she's also worked in the sphere of law. She's been a co-editor at the journal Business and Society for 5 years. And she's published in all the big management journals as well as other journals. So she's a truly interdisciplinary scholar, been working on sustainability issues and CSR issues, corporate social responsibility for a very long time. So very pleased that you are able to be here with us, Irene. And without further ado, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here. I've been working in this field for nearly 30 years, believe it or not. And I have to say that I've almost come full circle. I mean, when we first started, we talked about this idea of social impact, and it's only sort of, and then all of a sudden this data came and we sort of moved away. We talked more about financial performance and social impact. So when Brian Houston and Mark Barnett and I got together, we said, well, let's look at this. And so we wrote this paper entitled Beyond Good Intentions, Designing CSR Initiatives for Greater Social Impact. And we've all all three of us have come full circle, if you will. And we thought that we should now talk about not only where the literature is, but what stalled it and how we can move forward. So this Journal of Management article is beyond just looking at the literature, it's going forward. And hopefully I can encourage some of you to take the baton, if you will, and move forward on this. And so, as I said, I am happy. If you have any questions, feel free to look at the chat. I will monitor it. I will take a look. If I'm in between something and it corresponds to what I'm saying, then I'll say, oh, there's a question in the chat, and then I will go ahead and talk about it. All right. So let me admit some people while we're here. So there you go. And let's move on to the next one. So I have an agenda for today. We're going to first look at the patterns and changes of CSR performance literature across time. Oh, yeah. Then we're going to look at, examine the state of the art using a CSR logic model that we borrowed from the Philanthropy literature. And then we're going to discuss what may have stalled the CSR's literature's ability to address social impact. And then we're going to design a new approach to CSR studies. And we're going to borrow here from development economics. And I thought that it's good. It's a really nice way. It's also, the paper is very visual. That's why I chose it. And insofar as doing a webinar, it's really visual and people can see it. So this is going to be, that's why I found this exciting. Now, let's see what's happening. So how effective is all of this CSR? And we have thousands of studies that actually that explain if, how, it, and when it pays to be good. But the question remains is how much good has it produced? We know the input, but we really are sort of not aware of the output. We're good at looking at financial performance, and there the results are mixed. But insofar as what is the impact, the intended impact of the CSR, that's where it's a bit more murky, okay? And a lot of times we assume that it does good. We want it to do good. Why would they do it if it's not doing good, right? That's the question. But we need still to know how much good has it produced. Is it the best way of doing that good? There are many options out there. There are alternatives, and we need to test these out. So Margolis and Walsh's seminal paper in 2003 lamented, although financial effects of corporate social performance have been extensively studied, little is known about any other consequences of corporate social initiatives. And so what we tried to do in this paper is say, okay, let's look at it. Is there some needles in the haystack? Is there something that we haven't seen? But in this way, we're not only looking at the major journals, right? We're not looking at the SMJ, AMJ, SQ only. We said, let's look at the entire literature. Wow, that's a big feat, right? And then when I show you some numbers, you say that's not possible, but there is now with some software that we can actually look at, and we can talk about that, okay? So more recently, Wood 2010 stated that the whole idea of CSP to discern and assess the impacts of business society relationships. Now it's time to shift the focus away from how CSP affects the firm and towards how this firm's CSP affects stakeholders and society. And I see Sandra Waddock is on the call as well. Hello, Sandra, and her work as well has complained that we're not looking at the social impact. Hello, Sandra. And so these things are coming from, we're all saying the same thing. Okay, so let's take a look at some of this data. So research, I put this in, research is to see what everybody else has seen and to think about what nobody else has thought. Now, in the social sciences, what we do in this case is we actually go across disciplines to see what others are talking about, and you bring it in. So we share, and this is really important. And this is Albert Szent-Györgyi. He's a 1937 Nobel laureate in medicine. And I thought, and he's credited with the first isolating vitamin C and discovering components and reactions of the citric acid cycle. So I thought I'd bring that up. So I put some sayings. So he talked about that, and I think that's important for us to think about as well. So what does it look like? So this figure here is a CSR performance articles published in the last 50 years. That's how many, okay? And what we found, and that's from 2018, and notice there's a dip at the end here. There's this dip. This is actually not a dip because we stopped sometime in August. Actually, it's actually going up. Is that so? It's actually going up, not down. So when you look at this, you go, wow, everything was steady. And all of a sudden around 2002, boom, it started, this whole field started going up. Now, so the question is, what has come out of this? So to analyze this literature, we said, I said, how are we going to analyze this? Are we going to read 6,254 papers? That sounds like a great idea. I don't know. We didn't know. We can't do that. But we need the entire literature because sometimes some of the best ideas come at the fringe, right? And so we need to think and bring it in. What's going on? So what we did is to analyze the literature of this size. We use something called Voss Viewer, and it's a bibliographic mapping software. All right, and co-create, so that creates item co-occurrence maps based on text mining of article titles and abstracts. And what I'm going to do is after I'm done here, as I'm going to put that article by Van Eck and Waltman in the chat, right? So you guys can get access to it. Is that okay? So you can see. It's free software as well. Okay, and this bibliometric cartography enables visualization and sort of intellectual structure of the discipline into themes, all right? Now this takes work. This is an art rather than a science. It's because you have lots of words in there, and what it does is that it pairs words together and it groups it in clusters. So let's take a look at what it did for this, for what on my 6,254 articles. So let's look at that. Wow. Big word in all these papers, the word responsibility, okay? And what it does is the network, it takes that responsibility, and this here, this red, that's the clusters. These are all around here. This cluster is what we call ethics and governance, right? There's ethics, discourse, actors, all those institutions, norms. This is the ethics and governance one. Another cluster that came out is this pink cluster right here. This is what we called the responsible marketing ones. It's about consumers, attitudes, and everything else, loyalty, attribution, all these things here. This other big blue one, that's the performance one, we call results. It looks like disclosure, reporting, performance, financial performance, returns on investment, institutional investors, CSR disclosure. This here is all performance. You see the nice clusters that it forms? Then the one part in here that's sort of really just coming out, the orange in here. So you see here, this is the new one here, the employee, the organizational. This is the responsible HR, brand new, just coming out, that sort of leadership. These things right here that are coming out as well, which is fascinating. Now that's interesting, but I want to know, and we wanted to know, how does this change across time? So what we were able to do is actually break down the articles across time to see how these themes, if they're changing, okay? So let's take a look at how that works. So the next one, in the 1990s, we had 65 articles. Now, bear with me that some of these articles didn't have abstracts, right? So it's only later on that they started putting it. So, and because we only have 65, there's not as much, because of abstracts and titles, as much, sort of links. That's how it works. And so what you see is that what you have is the red cluster again, right here. Again, this is ethics and governance, right? You have this in this case here, this is this sort of the green one. This is what I call this CSR antecedents. Those are things that are trying to explain why are the companies doing anything? They're doing it because they're committed. They're doing it because of this good thing to do business. It's good because of the community, because it's an issue, attitudes. So these are the CSR antecedents. What distinguishes why companies doing it? That's the stage in the 1990s. That's where we were. And also, of course, we talked about performance. But notice the word impact. In the 1990s, they were talking about impact. Paul Shrivastava was talking about impact on the environment, for example, already in that period. So impact people were discussing it. They're trying to say, how do we do this? Okay, so there's these three main ones. But then in the 2000s, things changed. A whole host of papers came out. Check this out. And so in the 2000s, figure 4 here, we have 831 articles. So clearly the field blossomed. Okay, so we still have the red. See, it's coalescing here, this red, which is, of course, ethics and governance, so we call it. We have the antecedents, which is the green cluster coming in here, right? The lessons, regards, and all this, ability costs coming in. We also have in this, what's really interesting is the yellow cluster is the environmental CSR stuff, international. That came in big. And one of the reasons, of course, was a TRI database and also research on M&Es and the environment and CSR started coming around this period as well. So this here yellow, incentive practices, pressures, et cetera, started coming up. And we also have the blue, which is of course performance, social performance, corporate social performance, all in here. So you see more fields, more. And the further it's apart, right? They're not linking, these literatures aren't linking as much, but they all link to this word responsibility. It's responsibility to whom, okay? So now let's look here. Now, the biggest bulk of papers came in the 2010s, okay? 5,314. Notice that at the outskirts, what you see here, again, here you still have ethics and governance are very important. But notice what's gone now. This yellow cluster, environmental and CSR, that's now become an issue of ethics and governance. These words have now moved to the red cluster. We view them as being part of governance, okay, and international CSR. Then we still have this cluster here, of course, the cost of investment in boards and disclosure, that's firm value is still here, and the marketing part. Again, this new area right here, which is orange, that is the responsible HR, and it's more micro. And what's interesting is that at the outskirts of this literature, the ones that are starting to bring in issues such as human rights, issues of discrimination, et cetera, questioning property rights, it's now coming from the mining literature. Okay, right here, it's really fascinating to see how things are changing here. And built in also into this responsible HR is also issues of changing the business model as well, issues of that, which is really fascinating. So what you're seeing is the literature clearly has moved and changed across time. So now we said, okay, interesting graphically, but can we sort of explain some of the issues that sort of have made them move across time, and what has changed, and what has sparked this 5,314 articles all of a sudden, right? Is there something that people have sort of gone towards? And so what we looked at here is that I provided a comparison of the CSR literature across time. And in the 1990s, what did the change from the 1990s, 2000s, from 2000 to 2010? And what's interesting in all these, ethics in governments health is always important across time and actually gotten bigger, right? The issue of CSR antecedents, why are companies doing it? We're not doing that as much, okay? That's moved now to ethics in governments. And so that literature, if you want to say why, it's not being published as much right now. So they're looking beyond that. They understand why companies are doing it. They're now looking at other things. Insofar as environmental international CSR, again, environmental international CSR issues have shifted to the ethics and governance conversation. Okay, so they're saying this is part of good governance, of whatever that means, and they're trying to embed it there. Responsible marketing has continued. There's a huge literature on that. Today, they're looking at issues of emotions. They're talking about customer satisfactions, campaigns and trusts are becoming issues now. So this is really something that's the new area that they're starting to develop. Responsible HR has only started recently in the 2010s, and their cluster emerges and coalesces around the micro aspects of CSR, and that's becoming more and more important. Going more micro, there's macro part, and going more deeply micro. And then, of course, on the results side, KLD and CompuStat have allowed researchers to collect social and financial performance. That's why you see that cluster getting so large, because the data is available, right? When something's easier, then we use it. I mean, that's natural for researchers to do. But now, of course, across time, we have even more data becoming available. You have financial ESG databases. We have they merge CSR activities, financial disclosure with social investment and sustainability performance. So what you're seeing now is people taking some of this data and merging it together. And so that's what you're seeing right now. Now they're also taking data from Twitter. They're also taking from Factiva. They're also taking data from Facebook. They're sort of scraping data and seeing how things look and looking at how companies react. So there's more of this sort of scraping of data and more sort of AI coming on that people are looking at more deeply as well. So this is sort of the comparison of CSR performance of literature over time. Now, I'm looking at that and I'm saying, well, wow, but still not getting to our issue of social impact. I don't see that social impact out there. Where is it? So what we did is delve a little bit deeper. So what we said is, okay, let's look at what people are actually reading, okay? So before I do that, I have some homework for you. Are you ready? Huh? Okay. So I need some feedback from you first before we move to other issues, where the state of the art is in this literature. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to click this. Can you see this?
Yes.
Yes, excellent. All right, everybody, you have to get on your computer or your phone or whatever and type in www.menti.com. And once you're in there, you're going to type out that code. How are we doing?
You're making us work, Irene. Well done.
Oh, yes. Oh, I'm going to make you work because this is no fun. Because while you work, I'm going to drink some water. Let's go. Come on. We've got lots of people on the call. Thank you. Yes. Yes. Keep going. I see some people who are critical managers. Good for you. Come on, let's go. Yes. That's it. Oh, excellent. Only 21 of you. 21. I need more people. Come on. Excellent. So you're giving me a word map, aren't you? This is called visualization in action. I use this in my classes. This is free as well. And you can create this, add this to your presentation for your classes on anything. You can have any type of graphs you want, and you'll create it while people are in class. It's a way of engaging people. Excellent. Volunteer, ethical, greenwashing. Oh, wow. Very nice. I'm very impressed. Respect, legitimacy, silencing. Oh, reputation, pressure management. Excellent. So what words come to mind when I say corporate social responsibility? Environment, sustainability, accountability, ethics, trust. I see responsible, ethical waste management, ecology. So you see now, see at the fringe, people are already talking about impact, right? They're sort of thinking about that, but it's not the main thing. So let's see. All right. Now I'm going to ask you another one. How many? We're 63. We're almost, all right. So let me now, you can continue answering that if you want, but now to my next question. Can you get access to that one? The next one? Impact, finance, result. Okay. Thank you. ESG ratings. Excellent. Profit. Yes. Funds, money, shared value. Okay. Yes. SDGs. Oh, very interesting. Oh, I've got to keep this one. I will send you a copy of that too if you want what it looks like. I have, very interesting. So what you're seeing already, the finance, the impact, the social responsibility, money, value, cherry picking, you have all these words here that speak to what is social impact. So clearly social impact could be viewed as a contested concept. So if we as academics trying to figure out what it is, then also companies may be having difficulty as well. So what's interesting is that when we talk about corporate social performance, we need to think about what are we looking at, right? What ways of how we look at it. So let's take a look at the state of the art. So I'm going to see. So by the way, excellent job. So what do you think of these pictures? And you did it. You're the ones responsible. Do you find that? So how do we define what the right answer is? Absolutely. Is there a right answer? Well, the idea is that we're not measuring it, right? How do we measure social impact? How do we get to it? How do we design something in order to get to it? And I'm going to be talking about that a little bit later. And it's a very useful tool in trying to first figure out what we're thinking about as researchers and even as students, PhD students, and trying to design our research. How do we look at it? What are we looking for? And so I think that's really, really vital in understanding where our research is going. So I'm going to sort of exit this, and I'm going to come back to my presentation. I'm going to close this right now. Excellent. So now what we did is that let's look at the state of the art of the field. Now, how do we do this? Well, We focus our analysis on the most cited articles during the sort of 2010s, the ones with the most, 5,314 articles, whatever. And we only look at those who are the most cited according to the Web of Science. And the Web of Science has this core collection, and they call this site the Evaluation Insights, right? And by doing that, so we get that, and we find that there's about 106 papers that are in there. And those 106 papers are basically the top 1% in the 22 essential science indicators subject areas per year. So it's the citations per year in that year of the one that came to the top of that specific journal or in that field, okay? And so as of July, August 2018, 106 papers passed this test. Then we took that, and there were the top 1% and most highly cited papers. And then we exclude papers focused on sort of consumer perceptions, review papers, and conceptual papers focused on defining CSR. We are left with about 69 papers, and those 69 papers, Mike, Brian, and I, we categorize them. Now, how do we categorize them? Well, what we did is we went to the development literature and we bored something, also for philanthropy literature, all right? So Ibrahim and Reagan 2014, the California Management Review, looked at sort of this thing called the philanthropy logic model. We call it now sort of the CSR logic model. We adapted it. And basically this is taken from the 1960s. The United States Agency for International Development actually developed this in looking at antecedents, corporate social activities, or whatever it is, right? Then results, outcomes, and impacts. And so this is sort of from the development literature, they really look at, they want to say if you government does a policy, they want to know, did the policy work? And in the 1960s, they used this sort of logic framework to test whether or not things worked. And what I wanted to know, we wanted to know, is where is the literature? In the state of the art, in the 2010s, where is this literature? Is it looking at, one, the antecedents with corporate social activities being the dependent variable? Is it number two, where the results, the immediate results are looked at with CSR, social activities being the independent variables and this being the dependent variable, which is outcomes? Is it on outcomes, the correlation? In other words, looking at reduced emissions, looking at improved, in other words, looking at sort of the correlation between the two, saying that things have gotten better, right? Improved work environment. Three, or has the literature, any part of this literature, at least in the most cited, looked at causation, which is impacts. In other words, improved regional air quality or quality of air, whatever, or outcome improvements, whatever it is that you're looking at. So let's see how we categorize it. Oh, believe it or not. These are just a sample. So we have a lot, and the majority, okay, 69 papers were categorized. 30 papers, or 43%, examined factors influencing CSR activities. Okay, so that's category one. And these are some sample papers in there. Category two, 35 papers, or 51%, has a result or output of CSR activity. The majority, 80%, looked at financial performance. Okay, financial performance of the firm. All right. The remaining papers in this category that did not look at financial performance, and the most cited, were looked at food waste, emissions, employee engagement. Okay, so the one with food waste is a Chatterjee. No, that's emissions. On emissions is Chatterjee, Levine, and Toffel. On employee engagement is Flammer and Luo, 2017. All right, and societal goals, Benabou and Tirole have also looked at that, more of a theoretical approach to it. All right, and stakeholder relations was Bhattacharya, Korshin, and Sen in 2009, and environmental innovations was Varadarajan. Okay, so in the category three, which looked at outcomes, there were only 4 papers. And I actually think you should read some of these. These are really nice papers. Jamali, Lund, and Thompson, and Kara examined whether CSR initiatives among SMEs in industrial cluster in India serve the intended purpose of improving the quality of life of marginalized workers. And they found it did not. It was really fascinating paper. It was a qualitative paper, but it really looked at what happened and how it changed. They also have Kitzmüller and Shimshak, 2012, argued that more research is needed to determine the welfare properties of CSR, right? What is it that we're looking at? What are the targets of these CSR activities? Questions relating to who, what, when, and how to measure changes in welfare need to be developed. How do we do that? And then again, borrowing a bit from economics as well, McWilliams and Siegel, drawing out economics, they say, well, there's other ways in economics of doing this. There's have things called hedonic pricing to find out the value of things that aren't measured. We can do this. We can add that value in to find out what is the contingent valuation techniques and methods, and to measure the value of a CSR action to society. So there is this literature out there that we can actually borrow from to start thinking about this, okay? Now, what's interesting is there's nothing in category 4. I go, no. Brian and I and Mike, we looked and we said, this is crazy. So they said, okay, let's look one more time. Let's find that needle in a haystack. So no papers on social impact of CSR, category 4, at least of the causation part, right? So we went for that needle in a haystack. So we went in, I put in the word social impact and looked at other areas, not only on management. So Sinya and Chowdhury 2018 examined the impact of a CSR program that develops special classes for weaker students. So this company put money in and they found that it had an impact, but there was no control group. This is important because to know if it had an impact, if that CSR didn't happen, would that result still occur? So that's why it's important to have a control group, one with, one not. Think about this in sort of medicine, right? How do I know if a medicine works? Well, they give it to one group and then the other group doesn't have it, the placebo, and then we know if it's worked or not, right? Just what's going on right now to find whether or not a vaccine will work. They still have to do these tests, right? To find out the one group that doesn't have it, one does, is it better than nothing? Loosemore and Bridgman, 2018, examined employee volunteering in schools. Again, issue there was no control group. Then Luo, Cowell, and Seal, 2018, the SMJ, fascinating paper, I recommend it, examined the impact of corporate philanthropy on oil spills. And they find that corporate philanthropy increases oil spills, which was not the intended result, right? Right. So basically their argument was it actually acted as an insurance policy so they won't get, as hammered, if you will, when a bad event happened. But that wasn't their intended, result. So that's interesting anyway. Okay. So why has this stalled? I think one of the reasons why our literature has sort of stalled on not looking at it is that we have to go outside boundaries, right? And that requires us to be a bit more thoughtful. We have to design our research more carefully before even going in. And it's not just collecting third-party data. It may be getting smaller data and being much more focused on what the intended consequence will be or will not be. So everyone designs who devises courses of action aimed at changing existing situations into preferred ones. This is a quote by Herbert Simon. By the way, he was an economist, but he was a great management guru that many people in organizations and strategy look to. And so this is actually important. So how does one do that? Well, designing a new approach to CSR studies, the literature stalled for far short of offering substantive insights into the degree to which CSR initiatives achieve their intended impact. So the reality is that selection bias makes causal inference impact of CSR evaluation difficult. And we know that, we understand that. But there are methods of going about looking at this, and I think we should start thinking about how to do this. For example, early and late participants in voluntary environmental programs systematically differ in their substantive and symbolic implementation of such programs. So we know that. So what we can do is think about how Do CSR-focused corporations often pay less tax? Well, it may be. That's a very interesting question. That'll be something that you may want to look at. If they pay less tax, is that beneficial to society? So there are people who have looked at CSR and corporations and taxation as being something that are they paying their full share or their appropriate share? That's a really great question. And that could be also, how are they helping society or not, right? Someone could do a study on that. I would recommend that. That would be great. It could be different across countries. If program participants were assigned to programs randomly, then there would be no selection bias, and impact evaluation would be more straightforward. Unfortunately, this is not the case. So now what academics are trying to look at is something called a natural experiments. How do you think COVID has? Well, what COVID is doing, all right, insofar as CSR research implementation, is making us think about how do we, what is the impact? We're seeing that some businesses are succeeding and others aren't. Some small businesses are calling on, their customers to help them out, and it's succeeding, which is wonderful, and others aren't. So their relationship with their stakeholders is playing a bigger role. So what we're seeing is that now the research may start becoming more, instead of being big data, it's going to become, in order to look at social impact, we may have to go to small data, insofar as looking more deeply into relationships, looking more deeply into understanding or testing things out, designing a CSR and piloting CSR activities and finding out how it succeeds or not. So you can have alternatives. So let me give you an example that's coming out here. So this is a simple model, okay? So the idea here, I know it's numbers, so this here is the impact of or the treatment effect of a CSR initiative. This here is the expected outcome for participant I who received the treatment, a CSR initiative, okay, a community, whatever it is. And this is less, these are your control groups, those who did not get the treatment. So treated, not treated, okay? Now it's not as simple as that. It's not just simply the two. You have to also think about how you do this, how you design it. So let's add and subtract. Sorry, let me go back. Sorry about that. So let's add and subtract the counterfactual. That's the expected outcome for a participant had they not participated. So the reality is that suppose you're a participant and you had not participated. So what you're doing is I'm adding here and subtracting this part. So this here becomes the average treatment effect, and this here's the selection bias. So what I want to do is I want to make sure this is as close to zero as possible. And how I do that is I try to do it randomized, right? So if I have a treatment and I treat people, I randomize who I give the medicine to, right? It could be male, female, I randomize it. So then this part right here is going to be close to zero. And so, but the problem is that I don't know what the value is. So I try to reduce that as much as possible. And what's interesting is there are methods, and we can talk about, we just hired in my faculty an experimental economist, and I'm really excited because that's dealing with these issues here, is that how do we do that? Well, there are techniques to go about doing this, and let me share you some ideas. So 4 elements that are essential to impact evaluation. Number 1, impact evaluation need a baseline comparison, which consists of measurement of or information about the level of outcome variable before participation in the initiative. And that's what I'm talking about. Sometimes we have COVID is what you call a natural experiment. So you have COVID happening. If you had collected data before it happened, if you were, 2020, you knew it, right? And then you see what's happening during, and then see what happens afterward, you can actually have a natural experiment to see what's going on. The same thing here is that we have to think about the level of outcome of participation in the CSR initiative. The next thing to think about is impact if it requires a control or comparison group. Remember the needles in the haystack I talked about earlier? They didn't have a control group or comparison group who should be as similar as possible to that group that you have, the possible participants in the CSR initiative, right? And if you can, it'd be wonderful, all right? The next time is randomization of assignment of participants to the CSR initiative. It ensures equivalence of the participants versus non-participants. So if I'm a multinational corporation, I can have I have a bunch of plants. I can do one plant, put it in, another plant now, randomly assign it, and then see what the impact is. So there are ways of going about doing this. Yes, I will wrap up in a couple minutes. An impact evaluation requires a counterfactual and the estimate of what would happen to affected parties had they not received the treatment. All right. So further assignments, development literature does help us. Draws from a large secondary databases, right? Does not. And impacts are evaluated, and development studies constitute science of design. Just like architecture, just like engineering, searching for alternative solutions, we have to rigorously test alternatives. We can do this in businesses. It's called small data. It works. And I think if we do this, we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. Thank you. Any questions? Let's see.
Okay, a virtual round of applause for this nice talk. Thank you. There are a few questions in the chat, Irene. If you want to sort of scroll up, you can start
because they
whatever
started,
you like.
Really. Longer. This is great.
Yes, yes. There's a nice question by Florian
yes.
Ludiker Freund. Can you read it yourself? Do you want me to read it out for you?
I see. Would you say that we, as research community, are not investigating those issues which we should investigate, and then wonder and complain that things are not changing for the better? How can they, if they are not dealing with the actual issue, which is impact? Well, Florian, I guess Florian and I, we actually wrote a paper, we have a special issue coming out in Business and Society, looking at new business models for sustainability. And I agree, Florian, no, we're not looking at impact. It's hard to do, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's easy to do, but I think if we do a better job at sort of borrowing from other fields, we can do it. And insofar as, the testing of business models, new business models, this is an example of how we can actually look at it. The regular business model versus something different. How has that changed? And then we look at different types of impact. How has the relationship with stakeholders changed? And so what we talk about insofar as value becomes something different. What are the values we look for, right? What is the conditions of the importance of place, the sense of place? I'm doing some work with Indigenous communities here in Canada. And one of the things that these Indigenous communities, who's basically been told to get off their land, have said, that these companies come in and they take away, especially when it comes to forestry companies, they just clear cut. What they don't do is they're not here. They don't see the damage that creates, right? Then they move on. And for them, they say they lack a sense of place. And this idea of the importance of land, the importance of the environment, the importance of the natural for people living there. And so this is something that's really quite important and interesting.
There's another question by Nishant Katuria.
Yes. That the social expectations are dynamic, the needs of stakeholders are dynamic, capabilities of firms are dynamic, and measuring the impact in totality, COS, yes, is difficult. What can scholars do to improve studies on CSR outcomes? Well, what they can do first is admit that they don't know what the outcome of their activity is and not assume that's going to be positive. So when we undertake it, just like they do focus groups and they pilot things for products, why can't they do the same thing for insofar as the success of the CSR programs, right? We can do that. You can let in, I want companies to let in academics into their organizations to help them design different types of CSR initiatives and test them out. Small, see if its scaling works or doesn't work. So these are things that we can do. I think there are approaches insofar as testing things out. The development literature, Banerjee and also Duflo, Esther Duflo won Nobel Prizes in economics on development. They have an MIT poverty lab, and they actually are looking at issues. How do we reduce poverty? These are different initiatives. What works, what doesn't? They find out culture matters in certain areas. These are things that we talk about in business, that culture matters. Then this is the same thing for CSR. We can look into issues. Some of it's implicit, some of it's explicit. What are things we can do? There's so much we can design in and try to determine what the impacts are.
There's a nice question by Jean-Pierre Imbrogiano, not sure I pronounced that correctly, questioning the whole focus on CSR performance as opposed to a more holistic performance of organizations and operations as such.
Interesting. You're right. But if we don't even know, this is like billions of dollars that are going to CSR activities. If in the management perspective, we don't even know if they're doing what their intention is to do, then we have a problem, right? And you're right, it's to build it's the holistic, and then you increase the value. Then you find out. The example would be interface, right? When the CEO all of a sudden said industrial ecology, and they brought that in, he said it's a bigger picture. We're looking at, we have better employees, we know where we're going, we're focused. So what he viewed as the benefits is not only that he was able to sell maybe more carpet tiles and then recycle them and then rent them out and then show other companies what to do. He also viewed the internal value of the firm and how that benefits his organization. Mind you, he passed away a few years ago, which is a shame. But anyway, so these are the things that leadership matters. So yes, but I think that there's so many ways of going about thinking about value. And I think that's one of the things that Florian has both spoken about, and many others are thinking about what are the values here? What are we measuring? And in a way, we always said we measure what we care about. And one way of looking at it is what works. And once we know what works, maybe we could share it with others, right? We want this to be positive, right? We want to share things that are successful across organizations if we can.
Ruth Seeley wants you to go back to the slide before Einstein.
Before Einstein, Ruth, okay.
Before the summary before. Ruth, did you want to come in and ask an actual question, or did you want to just note down these insights?
No, I just wanted to note down these excellent insights. Thank you.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to actually give Stefan my presentation.
Absolutely.
So you could email me and at ihenriques@schulich.york. I will put it here in my message, on my email.
Thank you.
And I will send it to you. All right.
We will make it available, so no problem. Okay, so Sandra Woodcock would like to ask you whether you know anything about the blue marble evaluation approach.
Yes, I actually was reading about it. Sandra, can you get on? And can you share? I know you're involved in that. So why don't you share some of what?
I'm not so much involved with blue marble, but it's a holistic way of approaching very complex, messy situations. Yeah. And I was just wondering if you're thinking about impact, it's probably got to be done from this more evaluation. And this is a very brand new. The book was just released a year ago.
Yes, but that's what people are looking at. That's what I'm trying to say is that we need to go outside, right, and see what others are doing. To see, and when sometimes when I do work with my Indigenous communities, they really get angry sometimes about this idea of measuring everything, right? They think we measure way too much, and I said I agree, but I want to know how you feel. And then they're in the oral, right? They want to talk about things and they share stories, and for them that's what's important. But the reality is they also measure insofar as what their environment is like. Are things improving or getting worse? And so we need to think about what works. And so I think that's where I want this to be. This is not measured to punish. This is actually measured to find what works and to build on it. And I think sometimes what we do now is, just like our rankings right now for universities, we're using it as punishment. We shouldn't do that, If you do well, that's great. If you don't do well one year, well, so be it, right? This is not how we should. Measurement should be in sort of, keep doing well and start trying to improve and find out what works, what doesn't, and then work together with other data to see if it benefits everybody.
Yeah, and that's
some of these measures only benefit small groups. Yeah.
Blue Marble is a principle-based approach, and
right. And that's what I mean. In rankings and measurement, what are the principles behind why you're doing it? And that's why we talk about design. In designing, how are you designing this? What are the things that you want to come out of it? And does it meet that goal? And if not, why? And how can we change it so it does meet the goal in question? I mean, I'm reading a really good book right now on philanthropy and what it is doing good. And he says, like, some of the stuff that we do, that we give money to, is actually not doing any good. In fact, it's hurting some groups. And instead, we should find out why. For example, they're giving all these books to schools, but that's not the problem. They want better teachers. The money should go into training and improving the teachers so they can work with the communities, right? So it's not the books that's doing it. So this is what I mean about finding value and designing this and thinking deeply about this stuff.
That's great.
Irene, another question on measurement
Yes.
by Greg Malecki. Are you familiar with Sen's freedoms approach, the Indian development economics thinker and author? So Greg is asking, how do we basically deal with things that can't be measured in numeric ways?
Mm-hmm.
And particularly, that's the insight by Sen, that if you're thinking about freedom and capabilities, then that can't be always measured.
Yes. Oliver North, before he passed away, was writing more about issues like that, about this idea that there's certain things, that there's groups that stay in, and the idea of freedom, what is it? I'm looking at the US right now, right? I mean, their institutions now are really being affected. It'd be interesting to see. I think, has he won Pennsylvania? I don't know, anyway, but clearly we'll find out very soon. And that's why I'm glad I spoke today, because we're at a sort of a turning point insofar as politics is concerned, especially in the US. And what's interesting, I find, is that when we talk about it, there are methods of looking at things insofar as economists have now turned to this issue of measuring happiness, right? The happiness index, the development index. I mean, it's correlated to GDP, but not, because you can have an oil spill and GDP goes up. So the idea is that we need to think about what we're doing, and clearly valuation is something that people are talking about, and more holistic measures of valuation, but there has to be a consensus within whatever organization or group or community of what they value, the idea of principles. I think it's important. For some people, I mean, we've seen environmental groups, for example, go into indigenous communities, say, oh, they're great, they're wonderful. But then the indigenous community say, no, you don't speak for me, because I also need jobs. We have issues of poverty, that you cannot say that you're going to align with me only for this, but there's also this other aspect that we need to care about. So it's a much more holistic perspective in how to look at what are the principles, what are the values. And so I think that's really important.
Yeah. There's another nice question, which sort of going back to a question we had before by Harry Standen, which kind of goes back to this holistic view of, well, the way I interpret this question is basically, do we need better CSR or do we need better companies?
God, that's good. You're putting me on edge here. Where's Brian? I guess Brian may say we need better companies, to think about what their role is in communities, in society, right? Do we all grow all the time? Do we need this? Are we short-term, long-term? I mean, this whole sort of system has been built on maximizing short-term return. And so are we, I mean, going back to Einstein, can we solve problems by using the same kind of thinking? How do we change the thinking? And I think what's the new business model approach and things like that are trying to think of what is in there. how to convince people to look at different ways of looking at things. And sometimes we need good leaders, but we also need the whole organization to sort of move together. And so, yeah, we built, I think that's why we teach our students who are hopefully going to be future managers. And so far as thinking about this whole dynamic. Now, companies still need to make money, but we talk about growth, but what does growth mean? And what are the limits, the boundaries of our planet? Gail Whiteman would say, we have boundaries. Is anybody thinking of the constraints? What are those constraints? How do we live within those constraints? What are the trade-offs insofar as trying to think about this? And who's going to be in charge? Anyway, I'm writing another paper with a group of people about that we're not the Wild West. We can do whatever we want. We now have very serious constraints and who's managing all this. And that I think the role for government is very important.
Yeah. There's a request for Sandra, I think, if you could post maybe a reference to the Blue Marble approach, that would be much appreciated.
Yes, I will do that. Let me see if I can find that.
That'd be great. And just because we're running out of time,
yes.
Last quite timely question as we're sort of awaiting the final outcome of the election, although I'm not quite sure what final means here, because I think we probably haven't seen the end of this, I'm afraid. So there's a question here. Do you think the Trump administration has impacted the perceived importance of CSR in the US? I.e., we're faced with all this stuff coming from Trump and the administration. Are companies more inclined to engage in CSR of any type to perhaps, I suppose that goes back, it goes more into this sort of corporate political activity arena. But how do you see the relationship between CSR activities and the politics of the day?
I think that's extremely important. I think you need, you lead by example, right? So if you have a government that's reducing regulations, getting rid of any environmental rules, lying all the time, right? I mean, these things affect people. They think that they can do that. And it was unbelievable. And believe it or not, it affects other countries. I came out of a Costco and one woman just yelled at another woman because she was a visible minority and said, "Go back to your country." I turn and go, "Oh my goodness, then we're all going back." We're all going back because the only people left here will be indigenous people. I mean, I just said that out loud just to stop. It's affecting everybody. That behavior affects everybody. So yes, we need good leadership. Just like in a hockey game or in a sports, if you have a good referee, it calms people down. The game's played. We go in a direction. So the role of government cannot be underestimated. I know there are people maybe listening to me that say, "Government, go away." No, 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 no. There are referees. They know they're there for a longer period of time. Companies come and go, governments come and go, but we still need good leadership insofar as finding it. Not by special interests, but by saying, where are we going from now? What are the values of our country?
Great, Irene, we've run out of time for the official part of this talk. Thank you ever so much for doing this for us. We had a great turnout, lots of thank yous on the chat for you. Thank you ever so much. If you don't mind coming back in 10 minutes to have a chat with my students, message to my students, I'm gonna lock you all out and then in 10 minutes, if you could come back, but that's only my students, please. That'd be great. Thank you ever so much for joining us wherever you are. Stay safe and hopefully speak to you soon again. All the best.
Bye, everyone.